The final decade of Edward's reign saw the continued dominance of Harold Godwinson and his brothers, though this was not unchallenged. In 1058 Elfgar was once again in rebellion against the king, following his previous effort in 1055. This was partly another protest at his growing political isolation now he had the Godwinson boys all around him. It was partly forced upon him by royal and Godwinson disapproval of his decision in 1057 to try to bolster his position by forming an alliance with Griffith ap Llywelyn, secured by the marriage of Griffith to Ealgith, Elfgar's daughter. The rebellion was again short-lived, and the combined strength of Elfgar and Griffith, further supported by a Norwegian fleet led by Magnus, the son of Harald Hardrada, led once again to Elfgar being forgiven and reinstated into his lands. 2 rebellions in 3 years had not achieved much for him. Elfgar was in possession of precisely the lands he would otherwise have been. His reputation in the kingdom was highly suspect, and the Godwinsons were made to look like the good guys, having stood by their king against a threat on both occasions. Meanwhile in Scotland, Malcolm III Canmore decided 1058 was the perfect opportunity to test the English borders, and he raided into Northumbria. English help in establishing his position as king was not going to stop Malcolm from seizing an opportunity to extend his power south if he could. Tostig Godwinson met the challenge, but not head-on in battle. He manoeuvred his troops and harried the Scottish forces until he forced Malcolm to make terms. Tostig and Malcolm became sworn brothers, and the Scottish king promised to serve Tostig and Edward the Confessor, an agreement confirmed in 1059 when Tostig took Malcolm to meet Edward in person. The agreement lasted 2 years, with Tostig visiting Rome together with Ealdred, the newly appointed Archbishop of York, in 1061. Malcolm took the chance to raid again, and Tostig's absence was both a strategic advantage and meant he could do so without breaking their sworn brotherhood. Malcolm pillaged Northumbria, and the brunt of the attack fell on the rich and undefended pickings of the holy island of Lindisfarne. Upon his return in 1062, Tostig confronted Malcolm, and the two promptly reaffirmed their sworn brotherhood and let burnings be bygones, a response which did not go down well with Tostig's subjects in Northumbria. Shortly after Christmas in 1062, Harold Godwinson, with Edward's approval, launched a surprise attack on Griffith ap Llywelyn. The plan was seemingly hatched at Edward's Christmas court in Gloucester, and Harold covered the 100 miles on horseback to attack Griffith's stronghold at Rhuddlan on the north coast. Griffith received a warning just in time, and managed to escape by boat, but Harold sacked the palace and burned the remaining ships. A more coordinated campaign was then planned for the following year. Considering the relative calm of the Welsh border at the time, it seems strange that Harold and Edward decided on this course of action. However, the death of Elfgar late in 1062 begins to explain things. Elfgar's teenage son Edwin inherited the earldom of Mercia, but had yet to establish his power or his own relationship with Griffith. The time was right to strike. For Edward, it was an ideal opportunity to rid England of any future threat from Wales, and eliminate the man who had aided a rebellious earl, Elfgar, on 2 occasions. For Harold, it was a chance to enhance his own reputation and end the Mercian-Welsh alliance permanently, thus isolating Mercia and ensuring the supremacy of the Godwinsons. In May 1063, Harold and Tostig launched a combined attack on Griffith. Tostig pushed into North Wales, whilst Harold focused on the south, supported by a fleet. Harold's fleet did much damage raiding around the coast, and was combined with fast-moving attacks by Harold's troops across the countryside to harass Griffith and undermine his support. These raiding parties are even said to have left inscribed stones where they struck, reading, "Here Harold was victor." Outmanned and outmanoeuvred, Griffith was forced to retreat into Snowdonia, where his remaining supporters finally lost faith in him. Griffith was murdered on the 5th of August 1063, and his head was sent to Harold, who presented it to Edward as a sign of his triumph. Griffith's half-brothers, Blethyn and Rhiwallon, took over power in North Wales and promised to behave themselves, swearing an oath of loyalty to Edward and, notably, also to Harold. Now the Godwinsons really were unchallenged, until 1065 that is. Tostig's rule of Northumbria was not popular, and rebellion broke out against him in October 1065. Tostig was accused of many things, taxing the earldom too heavily, being implicated with the murder of several thanes, representing southern influence in the independently minded north and being too weak in his dealings with Malcolm III. What's more, the opportunity to strike was right in October 1065. Tostig was absent from the earldom, again. This time he was in Britford, Dorset, attending to affairs of state with Edward the Confessor. In other words, out hunting. The rebels attacked Tostig's residence in York on the 3rd of October, slaying his household and killing up to 200 people. They then marched south, calling on Edwin of Mercia for support, and for Edwin's younger brother Morcar to be their new earl. Negotiations began when rebels reached Northampton by the end of the month, and Harold Godwinson represented the king to hear their demands, hoping to reach a compromise. Not wanting to abandon Tostig, to whom he was close, Edward was willing to raise his army and crush the rebels if they refused to back down. However, much like in 1052, those around him, including Harold Godwinson, were not willing to risk a civil war. Ultimately, Edward was forced to back down and accept the rebels' demands. Tostig was ousted, Morcar replaced him as earl, and promised to re-establish the laws of Northumbria as they had been in the time of Canute. Tostig refused to accept the decision and went into exile in November, fleeing to the court of Baldwin V of Flanders. A regular stop for English exiles, and a natural one for Tostig, whose wife, Judith, was Baldwin's sister, who he had probably married during his previous exile in Flanders in 1051-52. Tostig also harboured a deep resentment of Harold as a result. Harold had failed him, and Tostig even accused him of plotting the rebellion in the first place, something Harold denied on oath, almost certainly honestly. The events took their toll on Edward too. He had been forced to abandon a close courtier, and his health continued to deteriorate as a result. Edward's grand project of the second half of his reign, the rebuilding of Westminster Abbey, was finally completed, and the consecration took place on the 28th of December 1065. Unfortunately, Edward was too ill to attend the ceremony in person. Knowing he was dying, and attended by Archbishop Stigand, his wife Edith, and Robert Fitzwymark, Edward is said to have finally nominated Harold Godwinson as his heir in early January 1066. Following a stroke, Edward died on the 5th of January 1066. He was buried in Westminster the following day, finally finding rest in the abbey which was only just completed in time to welcome him. With his death, the Anglo-Saxon monarchy was coming to an end. His nominated successor, Harold Godwinson, was about to have a difficult year. Thank you for watching, and take care.